Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 376. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're honored to have with us the award-winning and internationally acclaimed founder of Hoven Crow Entertainment, Max Hoven.
Max, what's up?
How's it going?
It's going fantastic.
It was interesting. Before we started talking, I did say, and I want to say it so all our listeners and viewers out there, check out Max Hoven. He's got some great stuff. He even did a shout out for this channel on his top 30 or best indie comic interview channels. And I was number 8. So thank you. That was cool. Yeah.
They weren't most supposed to be like in order by best to worst.
Right.
But
oh, yeah. Either way, I still was number 8 in that list.
That means I found you quicker.
Yeah. You wear a lot of hats, Max. You got a podcast. You do some filmmaking. You write your own comic books. You have your own kind of production company going on. To jump right into it, Max, let our listeners and viewers know, like, who is Max Hoven and why should they be ashamed for not knowing you earlier?
I'll preface that by saying that I'm like everybody. I'm a different person depending on where you meet me and when. But around 10 years ago, I was a totally different person than I am now, so to speak.
Right.
And, before my wife and kids, and whenever I had a lot more time to write. But just like everybody, when you have all the time, you don't have any money. When you finally get like the money and you're settled, now you don't have any time. But at one point, I just wrote a bunch of stuff every day of my life for about 5 years. And some of that stuff turned into movies. Some of that stuff turned into comic books. Some of that stuff turned into video game scripts. And some of it got published. A lot of it did not. And some of it became well known within the communities that it's a part of. So It Eats What Feeds It was like my debut graphic novel. It was a bestseller amongst Scout Comics. It was the number one best-selling graphic novel of 2020 through them. It kind of had a lot of critical acclaim. It sort of broke through barriers in different aspects than normal, so to speak, I guess, for independent comics, especially at that time, at that year with the whole pandemic and stuff. And that led me to then now where I have this Liquid Kill comic series that's coming out with Massive. The first 6 issues are already out. The trade paperback is about to come out in October. It's still available for pre-order. Volume 2 is also being solicited, the next 4 issues in the series. And like those are my 2 main comic book work. I had a screenplay that was optioned almost 10 years ago. Whenever I very first started writing, that's a story unto itself. And that turned into me producing movies in India, which I'm still doing. I have a movie that's in post-production right now. And some of that stuff turned into books that I have coming out in the future. But I've never been that active in social media or on like YouTube or anything until I want to say basically last year. And that's whenever I started a YouTube channel. And now that's where I'm getting a lot of people that know me now, because I started the Lord Max Hoven, which is now the Indie Comic Empire YouTube channel and podcast. And I just talk about the business of independent film and independent comics, mostly comics now. And yeah, so that's like sort of where I'm at now. And those in the past, they may have known me because I was at one point I was in a band and like stuff and stuff like that. It was never a big band, but locally I was known. But yeah, I've just been an all-around creative person for a long time, and now I'm finally starting to reap the rewards of all that time I spent writing ridiculous stories.
So let's talk about It Eats What Feeds It. How did you come up with the concept of the series?
So I have a writing partner. His name's Aaron Crow. We went to high school together. That's where we met. We wrote together in high school. We were editors of our journalism department and like our local school newspaper. And then we separated in college, and we also made movies and stuff together. But whenever we got back, we reconnected almost 5 years, 6 years after high school, maybe even longer than that. We decided to write movies and comics together, and he actually came up with this simple log line. He just envisioned sort of a scene that started off with us just sort of imagining the story of uh, two roommates and like a scenario in which you move into with a new roommate or something like that, because we had just come back from college, and we're telling each other old war stories and horror stories and fun stories of college, and ridiculous roommates that we had. And he's like, what if like your roommate you know, asked you as he like left at night to do something, that to slide raw meat through this weird mysterious door in his house or your apartment or something like that. And we just thought that was hilarious. Like, it's just like clear that something monstrous is behind the door, and that's what you're doing. And it's just like, what at what point would you say no or ask more questions? And then that led to, well, what if it wasn't your roommate? What if it was like this beautiful woman? And what if it was like your neighbor, that it's like, the woman next door, the hot lady next door that asked you to like be the mower lawn. And then after you mow your lawn, uh, she asked you to just throw some raw meat, across the fence to whatever's behind there. And that just slowly morphed into more of a story that we went back and forth on, and we narrowed down the plot line and the setting and all that. And that turned into It Eats What Feeds It. And that was our first story that we wrote kind of intentionally to be a comic series.
Mm.
And, but it was our first one that we were going to try to be like really adamant about making it really good. And so we wanted to hire a professional artist, and we still didn't have very much money, or it's kind of like, for those who don't make comics, when you're making a professional grade comic and it's you funding it and it's not a publisher or anything like that, you don't realize that you're basically paying the page rates for everyone involved and spending a lot of time. And a lot of times they're working on multiple books, so you're basically investing 20 plus $1,000 into something, plus over a year. And we decided we were going to just turn it into a 3-issue series, basically a first, second, and third act, instead of trying to make it something really long. So we turned it into sort of this really good but short, like, graphic novella. And we just sheer quality alone. And yeah, that story of like us getting Gabriel to be the artist. Gabriel Umazark was a professional comic creator that sort of went on hiatus for 5 or 6 years and wasn't going to
Okay.
do any more work until we reached out to him. And he wasn't originally going to work with us until we had to go through a couple of pitches first, because we didn't originally pitch him It Eats What Feeds It. That was sort of like a back burner, like that was going to be our second story. We originally
Okay.
wanted to do a really short thing. We wanted to do a one shot. We were going to be like, we're going to do this one shot horror story and see what we can do with that. And then our second one will be this sort of 3-issue horror story and see what we can do that. And then we'll do a longer. Uh, but instead, what happened was Gabriel denied that one shot, but said yes to It Eats What Feeds It.
Huh.
Um, and he also said that if he wasn't going to do the supernatural, he specifically like gave us the genres he wanted that he would do. Basically, he was like, I will do a fun cyberpunk, like a teen cyberpunk story, or I'll do a paranormal, uh, almost ghost like kind of horror story. But he didn't want to do anything like ultra violent, ultra scary, R-rated. It was supposed to be sort of like fluff teen fun stuff. And then, of
Okay.
course, we turn it into these like taboo paranormal romance story. And then he agreed to do Liquid Kill, which then became ultra violent and scary. And like, but he loved working with us, and we loved working with him. So it was like awesome to have him sort of. We kept him involved in everything that we could, including the story. It wasn't just like, here's the script, here's your time limit, go. It was kind
Right.
of like, you're the director of this. You know, your input is just as valuable as our own. You're sort of the star of this story because his artwork is what what really draws in the eyeballs. As long as we can keep everybody engaged and not let them down at the end, like, you're driving this ship or whatever.
Right.
And he really
Right.
took a liking to that, and we continue to work with him to this day. And yeah, so that's sort of the short rundown of how it eats what feeds it came about.
Because then you did Liquid Kill after that with him.
Hmm.
What are some of the insights into the development process
So
of that new series?
even though Liquid Kill came after It Eats What Feeds It, it was actually written before It Eats What Feeds It.
Okay.
So back in before uh, Crow and I even got back together, I was just writing a bunch of stuff, and one of them was Liquid Kill. But in its initial form, it was this insanely long screenplay called The Demon Army, and it was originally supposed to be a prequel or an origin story to the Sub-Zero and Scorpion characters of Mortal Kombat. That's like what it initially started at in my head, and when it first went on paper. That's what it was. Um,
Okay.
and it quickly evolved out of that and into its own thing with its own universe. And that was one of the first things that whenever I first moved back to my hometown and reconnected with Aaron, uh, he was like, "Well, what have you done?" That was one of the first things I sent him, and he was like blown away by it. Like, not like so it was so amazing. It was just almost like, "Oh, like, if you know how to do this, like, we can really do this." Kind of, cuz I was like, this is something that, this is like what could be a series, like an anime. And he was like,
Mhm.
"Okay." Um, and he was like, "I have a lot of ideas for this story." And so he basically started writing stuff for that, while like we would be writing multiple stuff at the same time all the time. Because the way we sort of worked is he would have sort of ideas that he'd be working on, I'd have ideas that I'd be working on, and then as we fleshed them into sort of treatments, so to speak, or just come up with scenes, then we would start to go back and forth and then actually send each other the scripts to go back and forth on. And that's how we did It Eats What Feeds It. But Liquid Kill was one of those things that once Gabriel was sort of like, It Eats What Feeds It's done, what's the next one? Um, Crow and I, we had another similar story that Eats What Feeds It, but we didn't want to do the same thing with him, and he didn't, and Gabriel didn't either. And he was like, "Well, if you guys do have a cyberpunk story, I am open to do that, and we can make it longer and stuff like that." And so that was when Crow was like, "Why don't we take your Demon Army script and I'll adapt it like my anime version of that." So it was kind of like what started as a movie that I had written a long time ago, and then what then became like sort of his anime version of that. Then we adapted into the comic script that everybody sees today. Um, and that was over the course, from start to finish. That's over 10 years in the making. When it comes to actually, like, Gabriel also then put his input on what the character arcs he saw of it, and obviously the character designs and stuff. So once his input was involved, we spent another sort of like 3 or 4 months fine tuning everything before, and then the sketches. And that was right after It Eats What Feeds It basically had its sort of peak of sales in 2021. And so
Mm.
we just basically just like took that and took that momentum and just started going. And now here we are almost, 4 years later, and just now starting to see it all come into fruition.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you. So any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. After that, correct me if I'm wrong, but you did write a book on marketing for comic creators, right?
Yeah, yeah. I wrote a book based upon, or I had written a series of essays, so to speak, and articles that were essentially answering questions that a lot of people had asked me. Because to go back to It Eats What Feeds It, I was a nobody writer essentially. When it rains, it pours, I guess, right? So around the same time in 2017, 2018, or I guess, so we pitched It Eats, wrote It Eats all in like 2018, 2019.
Hmm.
It was released in 2020, but right around that same time, that was also whenever I started to get some traction with like screenplays and things like that. But still, I had nothing published, nothing produced. So, like, nobody knew who I was at all. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, by the time 2020 and 2021 hit, I had this hit graphic novel, award winning, published, produced screenwriter, and stuff like that. And I got a lot of people that were just reaching out to me in the comic community that were just wondering. They were like, what did you do differently, or like what happened here? Because so many of us don't see that level. Even I didn't have like this insane success, but it was just enough to where everybody else in the community who'd been doing it a couple years was just kind of like, how do you do that with your first project? And then I explained to everyone, like, this is not my first project. This was the first one that I put all my effort into to make a strong launch on, and it's not like I expected this it to be like a hit or whatever, but there
Right.
were steps that I took that I believe helped in its virality in this small space.
Right.
And I started to go through those motions, and a lot of people were not knowing those steps, so to speak. Because, like I said, I was also not on social media. At that time, I didn't have a YouTube channel. Um, I had my Facebook was just my friends. My Instagram didn't have any artwork or anything. So it was like, how do you go from zero to people actually reading your work?
Right.
And so that's where I was like, I basically wrote what I was sending to people through email into these articles that then I turned into YouTube videos that I then turned into a book and consolidated sort of the whole method together. Um, and, and what I believe to be the steps that you can take in order to sort of grow your audience without just becoming viral on the internet. I could talk forever on it, but it's like what you see with people is you see the same stuff happen with them, whether it's people that are making movies. Because that was the other aspect, is at the same time that I was doing comic books, I was also putting all this effort into trying to figure out how do movies make money. Like
Mm.
understanding the actual logistics of the business in and outs of entertainment translates to almost everything. And then comics is actually even more straightforward because they have a collectability aspect to it that's like on top of it.
How has filmmaking made you a better comic creator, and how has comic creating made you a better filmmaker?
When it comes to the creative aspect of all this stuff, all of that I see almost as if just I learned or continue to learn from watching shows and movies and reading comic books. So let's just
Mm.
like just to start with movies. So when I was watching films at an early age, whenever I was like 11 and then was going to college for it, I was watching films to learn how do you make what I'm seeing on the screen, how do I make something look like that?
Right.
And then whenever as you write, it's like how do I literally would watch movies and write the scene, opening image, scene one, act like almost writing the script out beat by beat and trying to mimic how movies were made. And that's how I sort of learned the creative aspect. So once I learned how to create the artistically how movies were made And you can do the same thing with comic books, and I did it the exact same way. Literally reading a comic book and mimicking. Okay, the book that I used the first time I sat down to really try to learn what's the pacing and structure of comic books. There's another local creator from Missouri. His name's Jeremy Hahn. He wrote a book called The Beauty. I didn't know he was in Missouri at the time, but it was a hit Image book, and I really liked it. So I just sat down and was like, "What is the pacing here? Like, what is
Right.
he doing here that I can learn from, as if I were going to back engineer it?" And I figured it out that his pacing is the same as almost all of them. It's just like when you watch blockbuster movies, we have a ebb and flow, a rise and fall that we follow, and a lot of people credit Spielberg and Lucas with sort of inventing the 11-minute like uh, sort of structure of a blockbuster movie, even though not all of them follow that. And then there's like famous books like Save the Cat that you
Mhm.
really realize that we are in there is a science to writing. It's not just all what comes to my head. There's a little bit that I mean, there's a lot of it when it that comes to that, but when it comes to the pacing that keeps us engaged, there is a science to it. And I learned that a long time ago, figured it out. So when it comes to that part, um, it how I just do it by watching other things and trying to recreate what was made. And so with movies, it was the same thing. And if I couldn't figure out like what is it that makes something look professional? Like why does my home movie look like a home movie, and why does this look why can like how do I and then whenever it finally came to actually trying to do it on my own to where I'm like I have the professional creative teams that can get this movie in theaters, on Netflix, whatever. What are the technical aspects that need to be done to make it visually look, get to that caliber that's needed to be
Right.
professional grade? And then in the process of learning all that, I didn't realize, and a lot of people don't, because we're so creative up front, that there's a whole other back end to everything. That's the business of entertainment. That's totally sort of has been this mystery, or just you assume once I do this, then it's kind of like there's a second, just like gatekeepers that you sort of you make it or you don't. There's film
Mm.
festivals, and there's production whatever it is, distributors that sort of like I have to get it to a certain caliber, and they choose me. And
Right.
once I'm chosen, they just gets pumped through this machine, and a million people watch it, and like you never realize what's that machine that they are involved in, and interestingly enough, at the same time that I was trying to figure this out, like what is that machine? The machine has been totally. It was at a transitional period, right as we were transitioning from camcorders to you know digital SLR, and then also streaming, and the barrier to entry being nothing with YouTube, and everybody can make movies now. And as I was trying to figure out all this stuff and learning from professionals, like the people that are in Hollywood making major motion pictures, they're sort of upended at the same time, and they were trying to learn from me. And
Right.
it was this weird, perfect combination of they're trying to figure out this new world of YouTube and comic books, and because the writer strikes and all these things that are going on in Hollywood are changing, and it just has created this new community that I now have just tried to sort of straggle, handle both of them,
Right.
so to speak. And that's a long-winded answer to your question, but it's kind of like they just work hand in hand. But there's two aspects that I didn't know how much went along the business side whenever I first got into this, because I was just trying to creatively create the best possible professional grade work as I could. And
Right.
I just thought, like everybody else, that like if you can do that, if you can make a professional grade movie, everything just sort of solves itself after that.
Um, what piece of advice did you just that have you received recently that you wish you heard years ago?
Oh man, that's a good question. I guess almost everything that everyone tells me I feel is great advice. I would say there's not like one thing that someone said that's like this is the thing that changes. I think what I've learned is almost everybody out here has input that can actually tangibly change your direction if you want to actually listen to what they did. It's kind of like whenever I first got into this, and I feel like a lot of people think the same thing, there are sort of two worlds. You're an amateur trying to make it, and then you make it. And it's
Hmm.
just like you're either in world A or world B. You're either trying or you made it. And now every week as I'm talking to people, you start to realize that that world is very blended nowadays. Um,
Right.
in that those that you might think made it or they achieved a goal that you wanted. And so it's kind of like so if you view it from the perspective of, well, what can I do to where I just make a living as a creative person? That changes the whole sphere because then you realize that the what you're actually going after is not as hard to achieve, and there's a lot of different ways to go about it. There's not a do this step 1, step 2, and if you do well here you can maybe move up to level 3 or whatever. It's really
Right.
more like there, as long as you keep churning, you can find audiences, and some of those and if you know who to look for, you can actually continue up a certain pillar that you might be trying for. But it's like the main thing is that it's whenever they used to say it's all about who you know or whatever, it really is about it as everyone around you is now could potentially be a collaborator. And if you have
Hmm.
a lot of professional people and some are really smart and some have like hits like that, what you are doing that is the exact same thing that they do in the industries,
Right.
with on a higher on so to speak like the higher level. Like it's just the A-listers and the agencies are making those decisions and make those connections, but you do the same thing on your own, and you really get sort of the same result, especially nowadays, to where you can hit uh, sort of hit level millions of views and make a solid, almost become rich living just making a great movie or writing a great book that people continuously read and continuously watch. Um, and yeah, I don't know. So it's like there's no one piece of advice that's like one person's given me that's like, okay, that's great. It's really
Right.
just the idea of because to me the really valuable stuff is te- uh the specifics, or like, oh, I need someone to tell me what's a cheap way to color my who's a cheap printer, or like how can I get this specific thing for that thing, and that is done by just talking to people.
So, Max, if people want to learn more about you and the services and your films, the services you provide in the films and your comics, where's the best place they could go to?
I put it all in one spot, hovencrow.com.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's my website. That's where on my homepage, that's where the most latest things. So I design it to where if I'm making a YouTube video and I make something like pre-order my book or something like that, I put that right on my homepage. The quick links to order my thing, and then as I start to promote, like right now, I'm having people pre-order my uh, the trade paperback of Liquid Kill, and also pre-order issue 1 of chapter 2 of Liquid Kill. But at the same time, yeah, I also do offer services to where I will talk to people to help them market their comics. I sell books that teach it. a I also do editing services. I do also write. I'll write for people a very limited amount. There's only so
Hmm.
much I can do. Um, But yeah, for people that want to like learn about this industry, I try to offer as much as I can for pretty low cost. Yeah,
Right.
and I at one point turned it into a course, and now I think I'm just going to make it sort of just a digital thing that people download, and then just give everything else for free on YouTube.
Right.
Because in indie comics, and I get it, you just we're not willing. Not that we're not willing. It's just that we do not have the funds to spend. When someone buys a course for $1,000, they're expecting that that course is going to make them 10 to 100,000.
Right.
Because they're learning how to do something very specific about marketing their business or something like that, or how to get
Right.
double their clients or whatever it is. With us, it's kind of like I'm just trying to learn how to maybe make my money back on a comic book that I write. And
Right.
so you're not going to want to pay more than, definitely not more than $100, to learn all that, because it's like, you're even at best case scenario, what can you get out of it? It's not what normal people that sell courses can do. It's I
Right.
guess. And so yeah, I just am trying to make things cheaper and cheaper, but still actually, make it worth it for me in the long run. And so far, it's working for people, and it's working for me as well. So that I consider the indie comic empire subculture of my Hoven Crow Entertainment. Because yeah, all of that
Right.
same website. That's
Perfect.
also where I showcase like the movies that I'm producing and things like that.
Okay. Excellent. Well, Max, this has been great. This is a quick interview, man. You gave us a lot of good information, so I appreciate it.
Sorry, yeah, I
Um,
ramble, man.
and come back on when you have
Yeah, for
when you got a new
sure.
project coming out. Yeah, this has been great. Did you? So you might? Did you know a little trivia? You might know this one. What pumpernickel means?
No, I don't think so.
Pumpernickel bread. You know, pumpernickel is German for the devil's fart.
No, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I learned like the dumbest German terms.
Yeah. Where is that?
Jägermeister means hunter master
Master
or
Master
whatever.
Hunter. Yeah. Yeah.
You
What
can
was
tell
it?
what I did in Germany.
What does pumpernickel mean? There it is. Pumpernickel. Pumpernickel is done. Right, pumpernickel. Origin of the name. Devil's fart right here. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All
Pumpernickel is a
right, I'll
dense.
believe everything else you say.
Yeah.